have one superpower like America have to deal with another superpower like China. Never before in human history. Right? You had the Roman Empire fighting for the Euro kingdoms and chiefdoms in Europe, right? Then you have the Americans fighting the British uh, uh, colonies along the coast of America, right? And then you have a lot of skirmishes in Africa and so on. And then the decolonization process, and then the Marshall Plan, and so on. But these are all to me little skirmishes, right? Which are within the industrial global order.
Even the US Soviet.
Sorry?
Even the US Soviet.
US Soviet, the Soviets were really nowhere compared to the American power. Okay. So I've been thinking about this problem for the last 30 years. Trying to understand how do we understand reality? How do we understand history? Okay. At age 15, I read the Communist Manifesto. And I grew up in a situation in which my first memory is the bombing of Singapore by the Japanese on my birthday. Right? My first birthday. I could hear the bombs coming down. So I have lived through almost the entire modern history of Malaysia and Singapore. Right? So I have that kind of perspective from the pre-colonial, colonial, and then now the so-called modern phase of Singapore, of trying to survive within a very complex world. So I try to understand the complexity, right? And I hope to share that with you. So and I want to have your interjections as well as I describe it. Okay. So in order to understand reality, I describe it in this way. There are three fundamental categories. From Hegel's point of view, Hegel was the German philosopher, 18th century, 17 something. He talked about dialectics, right, which is a very important concept in which a certain proposition of ideas is countered by a different proposition of ideas. They clash, and arising from the clash, a new synthesis, a new formulation of ideas comes about. Karl Marx took that idea and developed it further, right? So he had three columns, right? This is the structure. My handwriting is terrible. Okay. This is structure. And this is superstructure. Okay. So Marx developed the idea of the dialectical materialism now, right? Because the Industrial Revolution produced the social class of people in which the dynamics of interaction within that class between the owners of capital and the working class, right, and the middle class, right? They are all in contestation, right? So substructure basically is the resources, the human resources, right, and let's call it human resources or labor resources. Structure is the process in which the resources, the capital, the materials, the human resources are operationalized, right, to create an economy and a political structure. The superstructure, according to Marx, is the outcome of this. So there is a flow from here to here to here. That is the Marxian model, right? Which has been seriously and I think correctly criticized by the postmodernists, people like Foucault, the French school of philosophers, Foucault and Derrida particularly, right? They invoke the very important critique of the dialectical materialism. That materialism does not deal with the human factor, right? It deals with the human factor in a very mechanistic way. And the worst example of that is Soviet Union under Stalin, right? The human factor was completely pushed aside, in fact, crushed, right? And that's why the very authoritarian, very totalitarian and very vicious rule of the political order. So there are three horizontal categories. I call them conceptual categories. Right? The first is the super conscious. Right? Then you have the conscious. Then you have the subconscious. Okay. Now this is very, very important because when we talk about let's talk about Singapore economy. Right? So the at the super conscious level of structure is political and economic philosophy. Okay. This drives man, labor, right? Material, methods is technology, right? Money, markets, meaning. So in Singapore, the education system is to produce the working class. And a working class that does not question the economic political model. Just shut up, do your work. Obey. That's what has happened. And we have succeeded tremendously. Materialism has grown tremendously. Okay. Now, the important thing is this. Meaning, right? Meaning. Why do we work? We work because we want to have a good life. What is a good life? Good shelter, good food, good security, children are good schools, right? We can walk about in the streets and don't get mugged, right? Social security, right? All the good stuff. Why? Because in order to produce the compliant workforce, we need the substructure at a conscious level. You have mentality. Okay. Now, mentality is also something that comes out from here. This is the subconscious level or substructure, right? This is survival imperative. Survival imperative. Don't die, right? So you got to do whatever it is that you can do in order to survive. Okay, so this thing drives here, right? Survival imperative, right? Affects mentality, right? So therefore, the favorite word that the PNP government uses is life is a trade-off. You want a good thing, you have to sacrifice this other good thing. It's a trade-off, the balance, the ratio between the good thing and the bad thing. Okay. So this is driven by this. Now this is where Marx made a big mistake, you see, because at the superstructural level of consciousness is what is called aesthetic philosophy right? Aesthetic philosophy, culture, art, fashion, all the things that we have right now, the dress that we wear, the clothes that we like, okay, which feeds this one, which produces three classes of people: upper class, middle class, working class, poor. Okay, now it's very important because the upper class, right, affects this, affects this, affects this. The upper class, the government, right? I just found out that the senior minister of state, which is kind of junior minister, right? The salary is $77,000 a month. Right? So it's not going to upset anything, right? It's not going to shake up anything, right? In other words, this one completely, basically, they say, basically they have art exhibition, right? So you have a minister with open the art exhibition. As though they are promoting futures non-material aspect of life. They definitely endorse the political economic philosophy, right? In others, you want to be a socialist, you go back down. So therefore, don't follow socialism. Then this is the important part also, you see. At the super conscious level of substructure is spiritual philosophy. Right. So you have all kind of philosophy, like Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, right? Which feeds down here. Right. Now it feeds down here to different levels of society. So this one feeds here, right? Which goes down to here. This one goes down to here. This one goes down to here, right? So the upper class basically says, if we don't like here, we buy a house in New Zealand, right? Why work so hard? Why fair up so much? Right? So all these value systems, right? In other words, in the dialectics of subjectivism, it affects the dialectics of materialism. Okay. Now this is the very difficult area. Here is E equals mc squared. Just as the survival imperative drives human behavior, the energy mass equation drives material. Right? Now here is a very interesting point. I don't want to talk too much about this because it's very complex. Here is material. 6 iron ore, tin ore, lithium, all the materials which are required here. Right? Here is a very problematic area. This is what I call the grammar of form. Grammar of form. And here is where we have learned something from C.G. Jung. We talked about the archetypal form. No, a lot of people talk about this. Why are there pyramids in Egypt, pyramids in China, pyramids in Latin America? Why are there pyramids all over the world? And they fantasize that, oh, because aliens came and brought pyramids and then all the cultures of the world were under alien influence from ancient times. But what Jung explained is that there are primary forms, right, which are archetypal forms. For example, a pyramid is simply the vertical incremental reduction, right? It's the
So would you say that corner is governed by principles or
which one?
that corner idea? Where there's a superstructure or there's consciousness, and the earliest one would probably be Aristotelism.
No, Aristotle. Okay, I'm going to talk.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about aesthetic philosophy. Aristotle made a fundamental mistake. Right, I have critiqued many times before. Aristotle mixed up aesthetics with ethics, completely wrong. And that problem of ethics and aesthetics was filtered through a whole of Western philosophy, right? From Thomas Aquinas right up to all the philosophers, Nietzsche, the whole of them. Because they did not understand that what I call, this is where the link between here and here. Okay, the primary. Let me give you some simple example. Aesthetics is about the epistemology of form. Okay, what is epistemology? Epistemology is the systematic linguistic categorization of sensations, right? And what are those categories? Those categories are influenced by culture, right? And taste and art and all of those things, right? And beauty, concept of beauty, right? But what is most neglected is this at the primary level. At the primary level, for example, give you a simple example of primary level. You see, there's aesthetics at the primary level, secondary level, and tertiary level. Tertiary level is ideological. Black is bad because it is evil. That's ideological, right? But today, black is beautiful because the Western people use black extensively in their clothing because they are rebelling against the conventional artistic order. And therefore, to be progressive, we must follow the West. So that is the ideological, see? At the cultural level, right, it becomes fashion. Right? At the primal level, this is where the difficulty, this is where we have to learn from him. At the primal level, it's very interesting. Why is it that we love babies? That's the baby there, right? We love babies, right? Because the head is bigger in relation to the body. For adult, the head is about what is the ratio? 20% of the body size. For a baby, a puppy or any little animal or human, it is always, we love it because it has got a big head, but chubby body and short legs. It's a problem. So it applies to the entire animal kingdom. Dogs, cats, elephants, all of them, humans. It's primal. Okay? The other very primal thing which we all know, when children are happy, they skip. In every culture, notice the rhythmic expression, right, is primal. It has nothing to do with culture. So this is why I teach my students. If you want to design something that has got no precedent, you must understand the primary level of aesthetics. Otherwise, you're simply copying and adapting. And the whole of Singapore architecture is copy and adapt. In fact, the whole of Singapore culture, the whole of Singapore thinking is copy and adapt. There is no original thinking here at all because at the structural level, right? We are simply what do you call it? A conveyor belt of other people's products, and we make money on the margin, right? How many cents can you make? That's all. So Singapore make money from now will be make money from the land. Okay, so this is a problem. See, so this problem, right, should have come here, but it did not. It got cut off. You know, there's no primary. Then now our whole education and cultural system eliminates this.
Is that part of the reason why in the 70s and 80s, not into music, but lots of friends were into music, that the government was so anti-rock and roll?
Yeah, because
Is that the reason? Because we're afraid of everything that is primal.
because it affects the labor. You get distracted.
Yeah, I was just watching TikTok and you were saying in the 70s, long hair, the police will grab you and cut your hair. Yeah, so it makes a lot of sense.
It is the manufacture of the manufacture of what is it? What's the word? Of consensus, conformity. The manufacture of conformity, of agreement, to agree to the existing order, right? Because the existing order is to service the global imperialist forces, right? Whose supply chains we benefit from the flow of the supply chain to us, right? So during the Korean War, 1951 to 1954, right? Singapore had a building boom. That is why Frankel Estate, Dragon Garden Estate, Raffles Heights, Shannon Estate, they were all built from the money that was made from rubber and tin boom. Because rubber and tin were required for the weapons for the Korean War. Okay? Then the Vietnam War, we became a conduit for American supplies into Vietnam, right? And therefore, we had the building boom of the hotel building boom because we were a rest and recreation center for American heroes. Okay. Then another interesting thing, 1965, right? The CIA managed regime change in Indonesia. In Sukarno was pushed out, right? And 13 generals were murdered, right? And Soeharto came in, and then the PKR, the Communist Party, and all the Chinese businesses, right, who were funding the PKI, right? 1 million people were killed. And the money all came to Singapore. The Singapore banks were bloated with Chinese money from Indonesia. And I benefited because People's Park Complex, 1968, right, was funded by Chinese money from Indonesia, right? So my client had a lot of very cheap money at very low interest rate. So this is the reality of this, right? So I would say that in the contemporary world, this is the main ordering system. So when I ask just now I asked the question, Hans Christensen, when I asked the question, is China an imperialist superpower? He didn't quite answer, see, because the thing is in a difficult position on top. Because China is basically saying something else. That within this model, right? Capitalism, you see, the Western model of capitalism is the free market capitalism, right? In which shareholder benefit most. The Chinese are developing, without saying so, stakeholder capitalism. What are the stakeholders? The people, that's why they were able to bring 800 million out of poverty. They are able to invest heavily in renewable energy, right? In greening the desert and all these kind of things, right? Not perfect, very messy, but the Communist Party is looking into stakeholder capitalism. They want to use the capitalist as an instrument of the socialist state, right? So at the same time, for example, Jack Ma, right? They say go and make money, right? What was it? Deng Xiaoping said, right? Rich is what wonderful, something like that.
Getting rich is something.
Yeah, getting rich is wonderful. But there's a point at which you don't use your wealth to upset the system by so having. So they told Jack Ma, shut up. Right. So now so China is going through that moment now. The big question so that's why I say that there is a conflict, there's a contest now, historical contest now, between the Western shareholder capitalism underpinned by so-called democracy, because the electoral system has actually been bought by the oligarchy class, right?
The plutocrats.
The plutocrats, yeah, who own the media and so on, right? So the manufacture of consent is completely in the hands of the top, of the leadership, of the top. The political leadership is bought by them. So this is where the Chinese model is very threatening to the West, because if the Chinese model suggests that we need capitalism, we need the market as an instrument of social development, but there has to be certain restrictions and demands placed upon the capitalist class, right, by social concerns or whatever. So I think that the Chinese so-called communist model, right, is also out of date. It means that the terminology is really no longer accurate now, right? And also democracy in the West is also not accurate, you see. So we have a terminology problem, and terminology is the meaning, is it? Meaning, right? Because how we think is conditioned by the words that we use, right? And a very interesting analysis by K.U. Jin, the Chinese economist based in the London School of Economics, right? She made a very interesting video recently where she went to a meeting in Davos, and the Chinese president gave a speech, right? And of course gave a speech in Mandarin, and there was an instantaneous translator, right? And she was appalled that the translation was very inaccurate, because the words chosen, right, were diplomatic, you see, right? Whereas the president said that we invest in the Belt and Road Initiative in order to develop, in order to use non-US currency. Right? The translation was polite, you see, they had to be polite. That the currency used in Belt and Road Initiative is moving towards a multi-currency. You see, it politely started. So this is the situation we are in. So what I'm saying that I can't go into more details, but what I'm saying is that we need to understand the interaction between the dialectics of materialism and the dialectics of subjectivism in order to understand the interflow of ideas and situations, right? Otherwise, we are just focusing on little things, right? Without seeing how each part that we focus on is actually related to every other part. So I asked a mathematician friend to analyze this thing. And the conclusion is that I said that the minimum number of interactions is 9 to the power 9 times 8 times 7 times 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2, which is 362,880. There are 362,880 permutations. Therefore, to zero in on one thing is absurd. Okay? Then my mathematician friend went one step further. He says, within each of these categories is also 9 categories. Therefore, it's 362,880 to the power of itself. This is multi-trillions, billions, trillions of permutations. So this is the extent of the complexity of the real world, right? And I think that if we just simply navigate through this, that's why I now call this, I used to call it the 9-square matrix, right? Which people say, I think it's very problematic. But my friends have now advised me to change the term. Now I call it the matrix of reality. Thank you. Because they did not understand that what I call, this is where the link between here and here. Okay, the primary. Let me give you some simple example. Aesthetics is about the epistemology of form. Okay, what is epistemology? Epistemology is the systematic linguistic categorization of citations, right? And what are those categories? Those categories are influenced by culture, right? And taste and art and all of those things, right? And beauty, concept of beauty, right? But what is most neglected is this at the primary level.